And when you bring kindness into a system where kindness doesn't exist, it shakes things up because no one knows what to do with love.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Sonja, and today I'm so happy to welcome to Wholiness Connection, Oneika Mays. Let me tell you a little bit more about her. Oneika Mays is a multi-hyphenate facilitator who leads with joy, passion, and wisdom. She is a grounded leader with lived experience that centers on mindfulness and transformation. As a Black queer feminist, she brings a poignant lens to building a world that is more compassionate and understanding. With deep roots in knowledge in Buddhist and yogic teachings, Oneika delivers practical application and authentic connection through her facilitation skills. With openness and vulnerability, she facilitates the space to talk about change and embrace every part of ourselves. Oneika has been practicing yoga for more than 20 years and guiding yoga and meditation for more than a decade. Since then, she has used her knowledge to support social justice nonprofits and historically excluded communities. She served as the mindfulness coach at Rikers Island Correctional Facility for 4 years and is currently a teacher for Yoga International, which is an inclusive and accessible online studio with classes designed for every level of practice. Oneika's ability to take big ideas and distill them down into understandable and relatable learnings allows her to show up as a conduit for transformation. She is your teacher, your auntie, your friend, and an intuitive soul here for the work of personal and collective liberation. From mindfulness and movement classes to keynote addresses and board meetings, Oneika consistently delivers a practical application of transformative practices at the intersection of joy and disruption. Welcome, Oneika.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today.
Me too. And I was just telling you before we started that I picked up some phrases and things from what you sent me, your bio and beyond. So I'm definitely going to want to talk about the disruption along with the joy and the embracing of a part of ourselves and all these different pieces. But before we get into that, is there anything you'd like to share about your background, your spiritual journey, and what brought you here?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I've really discovered is that I think the key to change, whether it's for myself or when I'm talking to other people, that it doesn't have to be such a big deal. I think in these times, whether we're talking about post-pandemic or whether the world that we're in right now, life feels pretty overwhelming. I think no matter who you are, life feels pretty overwhelming. And I think we're often looking outside, thinking, what can I do or what should I be doing? And the reality is we can start here. And we can really just start by looking at our own hearts and just taking a deep breath. And when we start thinking, like, if I can just take care of my own heart, like, it can be okay. And that sounds really corny and really trite, but it's absolutely true. And when I started doing that, when I started taking care of me, that's all I really needed to worry about because that's all that I can really control. And I found so much joy in my own life when I started worrying about myself because then, I believe this whole idea that collective care is self-care. So when I'm taking care of myself, I am actually taking care of the world around me.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. It gets to that philosophical paradox of like the inner being the outer, right? I mean, it really is so connected that it just is. I mean, it is. And I think it's something that, it can sound corny, but when you actually experience it, then
Yeah.
You connect in. Mm-hmm. And like when you connect in, then you connect out as well.
You connect out. And it's almost so simple that we don't want to do it. It's almost too easy that it's like, well, it can't be that easy. But
right,
it is.
Right. That leads me to the disruption, I think. Simply because, and I want to hear what words you like to put around it, but how you intend it when you say disruption. But for me, that just reminds me of like breaking sort of the patterns and just the like where we aren't doing it, right? We aren't even doing the simple thing. So it can a lot be around patterns, whether it's collective, sort of work that we've internalized or our own minds or whatever that is. It makes me think of that, but I'd be curious to hear what all you mean by that disruption.
Yeah, disruption. So when I'm thinking about disruption, I'm thinking about, whatever systems of oppression that we're talking about, whether we're talking about like large systems of oppression that are meant to stop us from connecting with each other. I'll talk about Rikers, for example. So our criminal justice system, which I actually think is not broken. A lot of people talk about the criminal justice system being broken. I actually think it's working just fine. I think it's working as it's meant to be designed. And it's designed to, it's not rehabilitative. It's actually, it's meant to correct, and it's meant to harm people. And when you bring joy in, when you bring in love, that disrupts what it's meant to be doing, which is to harm people. So when I was hired as the mindfulness coach, it was actually a pilot program. So I worked with a wellness coach and an acupuncturist. So first off, when you think of that, right, Rikers Island Correctional Facility, for folks who don't know, who are watching and listening, is one of the most notorious jails in the country, and it's in New York City, and it's literally on an island. And it's a very dark, violent, and sad place. So we were working primarily in the women's facility. So I worked with women, and I worked with trans men and non-binary folks. And I had my own office, and we were part of a wellness team. So I worked one-on-one with people in my office. And when we first came in, a lot of people were like, who are these three women who are going to do acupuncture, wellness coaching, and meditation and yoga with people? Like, yeah, like this is going to go over really well. But then when we started our program, and quickly we all had a waiting list of people who wanted to see us. And quickly, even officers and staff were thrilled with the work that we were doing. And when you bring kindness into a system where kindness doesn't exist, it shakes things up because no one knows what to do with love. And I remember one day when we went into a housing area to just go check on some people, and people were so excited to see us. One woman came up to me and she just hugged me. And you're not supposed to hug people. Like that's considered a no-no. And an officer, when I was walking out, yelled at me and said, "She's not supposed to hug you." And I said, "Well, I know, but she just got so excited." She said, "Well, it looks very suspicious." And I said, because hugging is really dangerous. And I was being funny, but she said, "Well, it's very suspicious. That can't happen again." And that's disruption, right? Something that's so unheard of. But those kinds of things start to melt, and people don't know what to do with that. And slowly, if you can start to bring love into places where it doesn't exist, it shakes up the system, because soon people make up systems. And if more and more people start to realize that this doesn't have to be this way, systems can fall apart.
Yeah.
And we can change things. And I don't think that people realize that people make up systems, and we can break them apart as much as they were put together. And we can do that. And if more and more people believe that, it can happen. We just have to dream a new way.
Yes, absolutely. I'm wondering, this is reminding me about, well, let's see, I'm trying to decide which way I want to go first. Do I want to go the holiness way with my WH? Maybe I'll go that way first. And then I'd like to talk more about that sort of oneness and the inner and the outer and the other person and all of that. Because there was a beautiful quote here that you said too. So, okay, but I'll talk about first I will talk about the embracing every part of ourselves, which to me is, what I mean also by, it's just another way. There's all these different ways of saying the same thing, but why I chose to do the WH holiness thing, like it's like where it's all the parts of ourselves, and we do so much compartmentalizing just in our mind schemes, right, of things like that, our body, almost as if it's separate, as if it can be separate from other parts of ourselves, for example, which I know obviously yoga is very much like unites all those parts. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about that. Like maybe potentially at Rikers, if you saw some of that transformation happening, or your own journey, or from anywhere along your path, like how the importance of that, the importance of embracing all those parts of ourselves.
When I first discovered yoga, I was really separated. I discovered yoga, you know, strangely enough. I don't know if it's strange, but my parents practiced yoga in the 70s. I'm going to be 54 next month. But my parents were practicing yoga like back in the 70s. They were running before running was like a thing, and I grew up playing tennis, but a friend of mine introduced me to yoga. I worked at a bookstore in the late 90s, and someone introduced me to yoga, and I fell in love with it, but I wasn't ready to practice. But I had a personal tragedy that happened to me in 2007, 2008. Someone who I was really close with, and who I was dating, he got killed in Iraq, and a couple of years later, my life kind of fell apart, and I found myself on a yoga mat, and I found myself going to yoga classes, and and it was in an instant when I was standing in mountain pose. So for those of you who don't practice yoga, I was standing in mountain pose at the top of my mat. So you're standing straight, arms down by your sides. And I realized that I was completely disconnected. I had this really incredible corporate job, but I was feeling very lost. And, I had sort of walked away from my life, and didn't really know what to do. And so I had been going to yoga again and again and again and again. And so I kept practicing, and found myself going to this class again and again. And I decided that I was going to go to this hot yoga class after I walked away from my entire life and was sort of grieving, and found myself in a hot yoga class in New York City. And if you know anything about a hot yoga class in New York City, in Manhattan, your mats are like 6 inches away from each other. It's really kind of disgusting if you think about it. And I'm now in chair pose. So in chair pose, you're sort of like sitting in a chair. It's 115 degrees. It's humid. It's disgusting. It sounds like it's raining. And a teacher says to me, you can change or you can be comfortable, but you can't do both things at the same time. And at that moment, I realized everything was going to shift, because my body was feeling uncomfortable. I was breathing. It was hot. And at this moment, I realized that everything was going to change. And inside and outside was no longer separated. And it didn't mean that I had to be running away from the discomfort. And that if I was going to transform, I had to embrace what was uncomfortable. And it didn't mean that that was terrible. I was so used to pushing away what was uncomfortable. And I was so used to holding on to what was good. And at that point, I had to let go and realize that I could confront things that were uncomfortable. And I realized that, oh, this is what it's all about. It's about the wholeness of things. It's about embracing the totality of my experience. And that's when I realized, oh, this is what it means to be a whole person. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm all of it. And from that place, I started practicing. From that place, I realized I wanted to teach. And then I realized that I had been running from everything really my entire life. And it shifted everything for me. And I had done therapy and I had done all of these things, but like yoga and meditation allowed me to really thrive and to enjoy my life. And it was such a powerful experience that I wanted to teach and share these practices. And particularly for people who like looked like me, who maybe hadn't experienced these things before. And it was transformative. And then from there, I was like, I want to share these practices maybe with people who had never experienced them. And then that led me to breakers and so on and so on.
Yeah, yes. And it's interesting because that joy piece, I mean, it's not about running from the discomfort. The joy is this deeper thing. And like how you were describing it, it was making me think of that connecting into it, because when you feel the wholeness, It is joyful.
The joy,
right?
yes,
But it's not
the joy.
necessarily easy. It's
It's
joyful.
not easy, but the joy, yeah, I always talk about embracing the mess. It's like one of the things that I'm always saying, like you have to embrace the mess. And I compare it to this, like my discomfort and so much of my unhappiness. And I didn't know it was unhappiness, was like this corset. And I talk about this a lot with like women and femmes. Like I feel like often we're like pegged into this idea of who we think we have to be, and it's like this thing that feels tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, like these boxes that we're put into. And instead I talk about like our life can be like this bowl, and instead of feeling like we have to like take things out. Instead, we can make our life bigger and bigger. So we don't have to get smaller. We can take up more and more space. So we don't have to push anything away. We can have shame. Shame's okay. It can be there. Disappointment can be there. Rage can be there. You know, joy can be there. All the things can be there. And the more space we make for things, we can actually stand in all of that. So it's fine. Like it's fine to have all of these things because it makes us who we are. We're not all of just one thing. And when we can stand and say like, oh, all of these things make up who I am, that's where peace comes from.
Yes, yes, that peace as well. It's so many of those things, the peace, the joy, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put in a plug for the book, Joy is My Justice. And I'm totally blanking on the author because I'm terrible with names, but I'll put it in the description box as well, too, because I don't know if you've read it, but I did feature it here at one point on the channel. And it's really like all about what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's a beautiful book. So this is leading me to this quote from you that I got in my email as part, under your bio. When you said, when we get closer to ourselves, we can begin to see other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you can talk about that a little more.
Yeah. There's this idea that we look out there, like we look to the outside, I think, to find happiness or to find peace. And I talk a lot about metta, and it's the Pali word for loving kindness, and it comes from Buddhism, and and uh, and metta means this idea of unconditional friendliness, right? And when we cultivate it, we find more of it, right? And more of it's available. But it comes from inside. And so when we find it inside, we can find it in other people. But we have to cultivate it inside ourselves. And so when we do that, when we find it inside of ourselves, we actually can connect with it with other people. So when we talk about metta, and in Buddhism, every sort of, it's called a divine state, and every divine state has an opposite and what's called a near enemy. So the opposite of loving kindness is hate, which seems, makes a lot of sense. But every divine state also has what's called a near enemy. It's almost like a shadow self. And so the shadow of loving kindness is conditional love, which I think is really interesting, right? Like, I'll love you if, right? And we do that a lot here in the United States. This idea of conditions. I like you if you do this for me, or you'll like me if I do this for you, which we do so much. And I think conditional love really infects a lot of our relationships. And if we can let go of this idea of conditional love and conditional relationship, we can change a lot of how we interact with one another. So by tapping into the unconditional friendliness, we can get so much deeper to ourselves, and we let go of this idea of having to like people, right? I truly believe we don't have to like people. And I'll be honest with you, and this is going to sound a little controversial. I don't really like that many people. And I think that's okay, because we don't have to. I love everyone.
Right.
But liking them isn't really necessary. And especially in these very, very challenging times.
Yes.
Liking isn't necessary. Loving them is absolutely necessary. Right? And I learned this from Lama Rod Owens, who is such a powerful teacher. He has a book called Love and Rage, which I recommend everybody reading. Loving them is absolutely necessary. Liking, not so much. Because if we can love them, we can move through the world. And I think that's what I mean by saying if we can get closer to ourselves, we can
Yes.
find those connections with other people and say,
Yes.
like, yeah, I don't really like what you're saying, but I can absolutely say you have every right to live your life and exist,
Mm-hmm.
even though I have to maybe have a boundary with
Yeah.
you. That's okay. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I do believe that that's really necessary in these times. And I think it can change the way we interact with each other. And it can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah. This is something it's sometimes hard to explain, but I'm always trying to explain, especially as I get more into, sharing my oneness practices and all of that. What do I mean by that? And I have a video that probably will come out after this interview that's very much about the boundary thing. Like that, I don't mean we don't have boundaries, but that can be sometimes hard to explain. Like, what is the difference?
Mm-hmm.
We can still have that connectedness and that spiritual understanding of the oneness and how this
Mm-hmm.
person even is me in this
Mm-hmm.
really deep sense when we're really sensing into the wider wholeness. Yet
Mm-hmm.
yet I might have a boundary with them. It doesn't mean I'm not
Yes.
having a boundary. It doesn't also mean I'm not also my individual expression, because I try to talk about like the oneness and diversity, diversity and oneness. I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
that we're not also having that. But yeah, it can be tricky to sort of explain that, I think. And maybe it's partly because I think, just from some of my other work as a coach and things and healing and all of it, that we have come to the boundary stuff, right? We're sort of like really embracing that now.
Yeah.
To have boundaries and all of that. But sometimes it can leave behind, I think, that other piece that you're talking about.
Francis Hemphill is this incredible teacher, and they have a quote that says, boundaries are the distance in which I can love you and myself simultaneously." And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is such a powerful thing to say. Um, you know, again, I think here in the United States, we've been taught that that boundaries are violent, that boundaries aren't okay, and that especially there's some of us who are raised that boundaries are something that we aren't supposed to have. I think those of us who are that are nurtured to be feminine are taught that we're not supposed to have boundaries, that we're always supposed to be taking care of people. Um, that we're supposed to be, some of us are supposed to be putting people first and that kind of thing. And I think it's really important for us to understand that boundaries aren't necessarily saying that I can't respect you and I can't respect myself, but that it is okay for me to say I can have this distance, because actually sometimes putting a boundary is healthy, because I'm stopping you from causing harm. And by
Right.
stopping you from causing harm, I'm also helping you. Right? I'm
Yes.
also ensuring, if I truly believe that we are interconnected, by stopping you from causing harm, I'm also helping you,
Yeah.
as well as
Yes.
helping myself. And
Yes.
that's also important. I think more and more these conversations are happening. So I
Mm-hmm.
think over time this will be more of a natural conversation for us to have. And right now it is more challenging. I think sort of in our world it's happening more and more. So it's more of a natural conversation in our worlds to have. But I think
Right.
I know my sister has 2 kids, and they're having it in schools, which I think is really lovely. That there's a lot more conversations about boundaries, and especially with kids, about hugging and touching, which I think is amazing. That
Right.
folks just aren't going up to kids and hugging them and asking for consent and those kinds of things. But with
Definitely.
adults, it's still really challenging, and for adults to even be able to say, to honor and even communicate their boundaries, it's really uncomfortable for some people.
Definitely. Definitely. Um, and and in a different way, again, bringing it back to the coming back into ourselves. I think that I've experienced this, that when I'm really connected when I'm really connected, I'm really grounded, I'm really feeling the oneness, the wholeness of myself, all of it, then the right action, I can trust that the right action flows out. And it might be a boundary. Like, you don't actually know what it's going to be, right? But it flows out as the right action, the right speech, and all of that. And sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it is more in that direction.
Yeah, I would see this at Rikers quite a bit. Someone would come in for a session. So, like when I had a session with somebody at Rikers and it was their first time, for a lot of the women who would come see me, boundaries were not even a conversation that ever came up. Anecdotally, I would say well over 90% of the, speaking with, honestly, even gender expression wouldn't even matter. I would say over 90% of the folks that I talked to had some form of violence happen to them. And so boundaries were something that wasn't even something that they had even heard of before. So this idea of being able to say no, um, was unheard of. As a yoga teacher and a mindfulness teacher, I have done trainings and trauma informed yoga, trauma informed mindfulness, and all kinds of trainings to allow folks to have a sense of agency, right? This idea that they can feel comfortable inside their bodies and express this idea to say no. So people weren't forced to come to a session with me. It was all optional, which is incredibly important. The idea of being able to say, no, I don't want to do this. So I would have people who would come see me. We'd have a conversation about where they were with sleep or aches and pains inside their body. And I would have people who would start to try to do something. And I can remember there was this one time with somebody who, we had a conversation about how they were doing, and we started to try to do a meditation, and she was like, yeah, this is terrible. I don't like this at all. And I say, okay, great. And she looked at me when I said, okay, great. And she was like, oh, we don't have to keep doing this? I was like, absolutely not. If this isn't working for you, let's try something else. The relief on her face that she said no, and there wasn't pushback or I was going to force her to do it. She said, well, what are we going to do now? I said, well, we'll try a whole bunch of things, because meditation doesn't work for everybody. Like, let's find what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And she looked at me like, wait, what? And so we tried a whole bunch of different things. So she walked out first feeling wonderful that she spoke up and used her voice and was like, oh, okay, I have a voice, I can use it. And B, this isn't one size fits all. And then she came up with a few different things that she could try in different times that were going to be helpful for her. So, this whole idea, I think when it comes to also what's going to work for us when things happen, when it either comes to boundaries or even finding things that are going to be helpful. Like sometimes I think we tell ourselves that I have to find this one thing that's going to work for me or be powerful, rather than understanding we're complicated beings, and it could change from even moment to moment.
It does. I know, it absolutely changes. That was another thing I mentioned one time in a video, was like, sometimes it changes our journey, and that's okay. Like, have a completely different practice. Like, for very, very long, centering prayer was my main practice. And that was more of a surrender practice. And then I came around to be having more mindfulness kind of practice now. And that's what I needed, to be more the focus at this point in my life. And so it does change. And I think the empowerment, it's like so interesting, because it's really such empowerment we're talking about. And again, it's not in that traditional way we think of empowerment. It's this wonderful power, and then everything flows out from there. So.
And it changes, I think, where you are too. Like, I know I wasn't really good with boundaries when I first started on my journey. So it's almost like a dance. Like, sometimes when I first understood what boundaries were, my boundaries were a little too hard at first. Like,
right.
I didn't let anything in, right? Because I was like, boundaries. So it was almost like an impenetrable wall. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I can let some stuff in. So it's like you have to learn, and it's a dance, and that's okay too. And I think there's this understanding, and that's why we have to be gentle and tender with ourselves that, yeah, we make mistakes and it's okay. And we, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And we realize, oh, okay, that was a little too much of a boundary. And so I let some things in and some other things out. And I understand and I learn and grow. And that's why there's this idea of gentleness sometimes.
Yeah.
And, and I think these conversations around growth and empowerment, they have to be flexible. And I think we have to be open with ourselves, and why vulnerability has to be important. And I think when I have a lot of friends who do this work and colleagues who do this work, I think sometimes when we talk about like trauma informed stuff, we have to be open with these conversations, because sometimes all this talk around trauma informed conversations was all about gentleness and softness. And while sometimes that's good, but being too soft, we become these soft pillows. And that's not always helpful either. Sometimes we have to understand that things are hard and uncomfortable, and that's helpful sometimes. We can't all be mushy all the time. We need to understand that toughness is necessary, and sometimes we have to know when to rest. Sometimes we have to know when to be uncomfortable, and understand the difference and how to titrate to discomfort. So it's both, and it's a journey, and the more we do, the more we grow, the more we understand these things.
Yeah, this is perfect leading into what I want to talk about contentless awareness, because I feel like this is the thing where I'm always trying to bring up the other aspects. Like, I'm not only talking about this, even though I'm trying to focus on it, because it's really more whole and dancing and messy and everything, really, than that. But yeah, so in my work we have a centering prayer group at the Denver Women's Correctional Institution, and I recently wrote in my Oneness Practices Substack, which is the newsletter, so it didn't come out in here, but it was a post there, just written, about how someone might, be surprised. Maybe someone would be, and maybe someone wouldn't be, but might be surprised that when we do go into the centering prayer, and again, people can leave if they want to, but usually people don't. When they're in that centering prayer, and it's a surrender practice, so it's just, if your thought comes by, releasing, that kind of thing. As you sit, there is this sort of group energy that is created, and it's the same. That's what's so interesting. Like, people might think, oh, well, if you have a group of, you've got the Dalai Lama there and, some other lamas there, you're going to have this like, whoa. And like, it's the same as like really other group experiences I've been, where there's like really, practiced meditation teachers. The energy is exactly the same when we do it at the Denver Women's Correctional Institution, which to me is indicative of that foundational oneness, and that, we are each other. But I was just curious, about your thoughts on that. I think it kind of loops back around to what you said at the beginning, I'm guessing, but I'll let you speak for yourself about the love and the unconditional love, and how there's that level too. What's been your experience with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Say that again for me.
Yeah, that was kind of a lot. So I think focusing in on sort of that contentless part, right? Because so we've got the part that's also there, the part, the story part. Like, I'm also a writer, so I feel like our healing journeys are so important. All of it's, but that piece of it, of honing in on that piece, that's the sort of almost it really is contentless, I guess. That contentless piece where we're joined. Yeah.
Inside versus outside, like inside correctional facility versus outside.
Well, I think it's everywhere. It's just, I guess, that moment to me of feeling that, and then realizing, oh, people might think that it's different somewhere else, but it's not. Like, that same thing we're touching into in our group energy is the same.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Totally. Yes. That is the number one question that I get from people. Like, is it different? It's absolutely the same. Like, absolutely the same. Yes. And I don't know why anybody would think it was different. Like, it's absolutely the same.
Yeah. I think it's just touching into that piece where we all are so connected in one. That's, that the part where it's each our stories is so important too, but it's also true that we're one. It's like just two sides of a paradox, I think. But
yeah. And I'm sure you get this too when people find out what you do. They're like, "Oh, what's that like?" Like when people, what I volunteered for like 6 years, and then when I worked there full time for 4, the number one question is, "Oh, what's that like?" Teaching yoga at Rikers, and I'm like, "It's like teaching yoga at a yoga studio." Um,
Mm.
it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the same because people are people, and oneness is oneness,
Right.
um, and actually, quite frankly, the focus is actually usually more inside than it is outside. If you want me to really get technical, but that's a
Yeah. 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 I can. Yeah. I think you're right, actually, because of
yeah,
the
and
people in
I
essence
think
too.
that is because I know sometimes um, the concentration is sometimes stronger because there's so much chaos around when I'm inside. Um, there's a zoning in that can happen more quickly. Um,
Right. 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 Mm-hmm.
like that centering can happen, especially if it's a um, if I was leading a group in a housing area that was particularly hectic. um, I do remember one time I was in a housing area, and it was a dorm, and the other side of the dorm was having there was like a fight happening, and the side that I was on, it was a young adult dorm on the other side. So, and the side that I was on was definitely much older. And at first, the side that I was on, super annoyed that they were doing their thing over there. And I said, you know what? Why don't we send loving kindness to them over there? Let's
Mm.
not be annoyed. What if we did that? And at
Yeah.
first, everybody, rolling their eyes at me. Here goes Oneika with her loving kindness thing. But I said, but what if we did it just for a second? Like, what if we tried it? And everybody did for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, there was stillness, even on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that gives you
It
chills.
started up again, but
Mm-hmm.
for a moment.
Yeah.
And we stayed still on our side.
Yeah. Yep.
And they heard that moment of stillness.
Yeah.
And we stayed and we did a loving kindness meditation. And then afterwards, everybody was like, okay, we get it. We get it.
Yeah. 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 It's so powerful
Like,
in
we
ways
get it.
that we can't always explain,
We can't,
or sometimes we
and
don't know, but sometimes we never know.
right. And there was that moment that, people who were like, and this transcends, because a lot of the folks that I dealt with were deeply rooted in Christianity, and, and I said, this isn't about Buddhism. This is just about love here. We're just sending love over there. That's all we're doing. Like, sending these young folks love. Like, we're all a little older. We all know what fires we've all walked through. This is all we're doing. Like, we know what we've been through. Let's just tell them, we got you. Like, we got you.
Yeah.
And there's power. Sometimes there's power in that. And I
Yeah.
think that I hold on to a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. What a beautiful story to share. Thank you for sharing that. We're already getting close on our time here, so I want to allow a little time for you to share a short practice at the end, if you're willing.
Yes.
But before we do that,
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about your current offerings and how people can reach you, and I'll put it in the description box, of course, too. But
Yeah. Current offerings that will be coming up that you'll be able to see. They're not posted yet, but I'm going to be doing some things at Kripalu, which is in Massachusetts. I'll be doing a metta retreat at Kripalu. You'll be able to find that on my link tree. So if you go to my Instagram, you'll find that. I'll be also offering a training for folks who are looking to teach mindfulness practices and mindful movement to folks who might be in carceral settings. And I'll be doing that with my dear friend who also offers mindfulness practices. He's the founder of One Love Prison Meditation Project, and he offers these practices to folks. And Florida and Georgia will be doing that at Kripalu. I'll also be having some new offerings soon. So on a couple of different apps, so you can follow me on my link tree to find that. Yeah, this conversation went so quickly. It was really such a pleasure.
It really did. It really did. I know.
And I will be having a book coming out soon too about some of my experiences at Rikers. So stay tuned for that too.
Wonderful.
And you can sign up for my newsletter for all of these updates too, and you can find that on my link tree.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about closing out with the practice? Does that
sound let's do a practice together. Is my singing bowl nearby? I think it is. Hang on just 1 second. I'm going to grab it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Scoot a little bit over because I'm falling into the middle of the cushions there.
Okay. So I'll invite you to just get comfy, whatever that means for you. You can sit, stand, lay down, just allow yourself to settle and drop in. Maybe you're taking in the words from our conversation. Maybe you're letting the words sit on your heart. But we were really practicing love today and centering humanity. Speaking from our heart. I like to work with the heart chakra, also called Anahata. It means unstruck. If you'd like, you can think about it, your heart, or place a hand there. You can even think about someone you love. Maybe even a time that they were celebrating something, or even when they were suffering. And just silently say, may you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you be free. And send that to them like a gift. And now think about yourself. Either now or when you were younger. Sometimes it can be tough to offer ourselves friendliness. So you might think about that loved one instead, even offering you some love. But offer yourself some friendliness by silently repeating, may I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. And may I be free. Give yourself this offering of friendliness. And now maybe thinking about someone you don't know very well, or maybe even a group of people that you don't know very well. Maybe the people that we've been talking about, people who are incarcerated or people in another part of the world, people on the other side of town, neighbors you don't talk to very often. But no, just like you, they've celebrated things, they've struggled. Offer them love by silently repeating, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you be free. And now perhaps think about someone who's irritated you a little bit. Not the person who's caused you the most harm, just someone who got under your skin a little. And give them a little love. Silently say, may you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you be free. And then feel all of that love expand out into the world. Into the whole world is held by that love. Reaching out into space. As you silently say, may we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. And may we be free. And then slowly draw it back and bring it back to your heart. And in a moment, I'll ring a singing bowl. And you can close your practice however you want.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.